these child killers? So that's something you have to ask in your own conscience. And whatever that has to do with Jesus, you tell me, because I don't see any connection.
Just think that money going into that plate could be paying for a fancy lawyer to come and protect one of these child violators so they can just get a slap on the wrist and commit more crimes. It's absolutely disgusting. And unless we shine a light on this, there's just going to be more and more victims, and it's got to stop. So Chris wants to know, what are the daily, day-to-day responsibilities and duties of the Pope?
He's a figurehead, so there aren't necessarily any duties. I know this from priests and other people I spoke to in Italy, that essentially he's a showman. So he presides at certain conferences and meetings of the cardinals, okay? He has that administrative role. He does a lot of public relations tours all over the world, so all the slaves can get down and worship him. You know, but I mean, it's essentially a figurehead position. And like I mentioned, the real power in the Rome, in the Vatican, Pietro Parolin, he spends a lot of the time at the center of power, not like this guy. This guy is not at the center of power. And so, you know, that's kind of a short answer.
So Angela wants to know, who are the higher up people that control the Vatican?
Well, spiritually, the father of lies, Satan, I believe. And politically, and in terms of this world, it's their bankers, it's the College of Cardinals, and it's their connections with various governments like China and that. I mean, like we showed in China, it's run by a joint committee of the Chinese government and the Vatican. So, I mean, in a nutshell.
So Franz wants to know if you think this Pope will continue to be involved in moving around and covering up kids, covering up priests who violate kids.
He has to. It's the policy that he do so. Crimen Solicitanis. Read it. Go to murderbydecree.com. Read in the appendices, one of the appendices there, the entire policy. Every Catholic in the world, not just every clergy and every cardinal and pope, but every Catholic in the world, and this is again addressed to the previous person who objected about us taking on her church, she is expected to enforce crimen, which means if you know of a child being raped, you're not to protect that child. You're to protect the church, not the child. And you can't tell the police. That's a criminal conspiracy. I mean, imagine if the mafia was doing that. The mafia is saying, we have a policy that any, Italian child raped, we're not to tell the police. They'd be immediately arrested. Well, how come they get to do it? Because they have a cross on their building.
It's crazy that this guy's in plain sight being elected. He's got a history of doing it, and he's probably going to continue to do it. It's like they just don't care. So AE is asking, how do we go about dismantling this corrupt institution?
Well, we outline that actually at the back book of, right at the back, we say a plan of action. It happens on different levels. First of all, don't attend. Get your friends not to attend. Don't give money if you do. Join our movement. We have, in 9 countries now, we have campaigns. It's called banishment and reclamation. And it came up an indigenous idea that we just go into the churches, take them over. They've been banished from these 9 countries. And like in the Republic of Canada, we have a policy, the Catholic, Anglican, United Churches aren't allowed to operate on their territory. They're convicted criminal bodies that harm children, harm the community, defraud and steal money from the community. And so they're not allowed to operate. So you can do that from the grassroots. That's how you deflate a system, right at the grassroots. But also you can make this an issue politically. You can say to your politicians, stop giving tax exemptions and any kind of privileges to the Vatican, nullify your diplomatic relation, expel the papal nuncio. It's all described in Dethroning Rogue Power, but also murderbydecree.com. But most importantly, write to us and we can get you involved in that campaign.
Yeah, because you're asking, James is asking, how can he join your movement? So with the links in the description box, people can contact you, can't they?
Angelfire101 at protonmail.com is the best way. And there's other links that Shaun has up.
So Claudia wants to know, do you know who the other two papal contenders were?
There are a number of them listed. Pietro Parolin was in there. They had to put him in. Just kind of for appearance sake. There was a Chinese fellow, I forget his name, and also Geraldo Lacroix, the Ninth Circle guy in Canada we talked about last time.
Okay, so Hazel wants to know, does the Roman Catholic Church brainwash people from childhood by ritual and repetition?
Yeah, and well, Shaun, you could probably answer that better because you were raised in the cult, but I never was. But it's also the underlying fear of damnation, going to hell, and you're incomplete without the sacraments. You're incomplete without us. It's that childhood dependency that they never change, right?
Yeah, and I was educated in Catholic school as well, so that ritual and repetition extended into our assemblies and our religious education classes. And, to this day, I remember all the sitting up, when you got to sit down and stand up, and all the different prayers, Our Father, Hail Mary, contrition, confession, and then they tell you to, the contrition, what you've got, how many Our Fathers and Hail Marys you've got to say. Yeah, so there's a lot of repetition. All right, Tashelle wants to know, where does all the money from the Vatican go?
Oh, well, it goes into places like the international banking cartel are totally integrated with the Vatican Bank. So you could also ask, well, where does all their money go? It goes into the whole financial system. It goes into the military in a big way, all their investments. The problem is we don't know because the Vatican Bank is a completely secret society. You can't audit it. You can't know who the directors are. The only information we've ever gotten is from sources within the Vatican who leak us this information. But it was set up by Mussolini, the fascist dictator, in 1929 to be a closed society. And it's very murky in there, right? And you don't know what they're doing, but we do know that a lot of the world's money is being channeled into it. And, that's something that needs a lot more digging.
Haven't a few people ended up murdered associated with the Vatican Bank?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Roberto Calvi, the Vatican's banker, found hanging under Blackfriar Bridge in London. That happened right at the same time that they killed John Paul I. The Santa Alianza is the name of the Vatican Assassination Espionage Bureau. They killed him. They poisoned him. Anybody who knew John Paul I or worked with him or investigated his death, they were all dead within a year or two. From car bombings, assassinations, so it's all part of that mess, right?
Tashelle, is the Vatican the nucleus or head of all Christian religions and churches?
No, it's not a Christian religion. And it's part of, you see, this thing came out of what was called Vatican II in 1962, this thing called ecumenism, which meant all the world's religions get together. But it's kind of like the chickens getting together with the elephant. What happens? They get stomped. The notion the Vatican has of ecumenism is that there's no power outside Rome. All of you people are false churches. And what distinguishes a Christian church is the belief that Christ is the head of their church, not a man in Rome. It's a fundamental division. That's why every Protestant church in history used to refer to Rome as the Antichrist. None of them do now because they're all getting funded out of it. And what's called the World Council of Churches, which is the Protestant, it's kind of like the Protestant equivalent of the Vatican. It's a federation of all these Protestant churches around the world, but they're just a reflection of the Vatican now. They're being completely co-opted as part of the United Nations to create this one world church, one world government system. And I know that in seminary, when I began to criticize the World Council of Churches, they did not like that any more than later when I described the crimes of genocide against children. So, I mean, it's part of the big cabal. And so it's hard to say there are such things as Christian churches anymore. I think they're pretty much integrated into the global corporatocracy, right? That's enunciated in Rome.
So Corey wants to know what we mean when we're saying that the Vatican is satanic.
it reflects the power of this world rather than of God. And I think that should be obvious. I mean, why would God need a cathedral and billions of dollars of money and arms trading and a policy protecting, you know, those who harm children? What does that have to do with God? It should be obvious. It's right in, it's like the elephant in the living room. It's staring at our face. So Satan in the Bible is the one who is the enemy. Satan means adversary, the adversary of God. So, you know, in all faiths, you look at God, it's that they describe it as a spiritual power within us. The kingdom of heaven is within you, not in the church. And Satan represents the adversary of that. And the Church of Rome is, for many reasons you can look at historically, if you read the real histories, you'll see that it's the embodiment of their worldly power. But like Satan, father of lies, it exists behind the lie of piety and co-opting Christ into Christendom, right? And that's a whole history in of itself. And I go into a little bit of that in Dethroning, but I've written some other books on that as well.
I'll just add to that my personal belief is crimes against children are the most evil acts anyone can commit. And any institution that enables, condones, protects perpetrators is not pious. It's an inversion of what it's purporting to be. So Jen wants to know, are you aware of what Italians really think about the Vatican?
Yeah, I've done a lot of work in Italy. And as a matter of fact, in the fall, in September, I'm coming back to Europe and giving talks all over. And I'm looking forward to going to Rome. But in northern Italy, there's a whole network of people who are setting up their own common law assemblies. And we're talking to those folks. That's one of the questions I often ask them. Well, how much support does the church have anymore? They say it's a formal kind of support, especially from older people. But like you found in Quebec, in Canada, a lot of people don't go to church anymore. You know, it's like they say 1.4 billion Catholics in the world. That's formal. You know, that's people go to church, as I experienced, on Easter or for baptisms or funerals, but they're not devout. And you don't find that devotion even in Italy anymore. I remember that case when Bergoglio went to Ireland, which is supposed to be this loyal Catholic country. He got about 5% turnout at the rallies he was to speak at, that they figured. And Italy's a lot like Ireland. But so I think it's crumbling all over the world. And the more the reality of it crumbles, the more you have to create this edifice, this appearance that you're doing fine and you're reforming and we believe in children, all of this garbage, you know, that you can do with billions of dollars at your disposal. But the reality is something much more basic, and you're seeing it fall apart on the ground. And I travel a lot. I see that all over, you know.
Almost 2,000 watching live across all platforms presently. Please support Kevin's links and check out his books. And Ray J, do you see any connection between the anti-Russian agenda and American Pope being elected? That's interesting because you've touched on China quite a lot, but and China's and Russia seem to be quite close versus America's relationships with them.
Well, I mean, yeah, it is there. Like I say, there's a convergence happening, and you know, Trump made overtures to Russia, and then to the Ukraine. You have to kind of, you got to create a fog all the time. Machiavelli talks about this in The Prince. He says, when you're a ruler, you got to always create a fog about what you're doing, and therefore, it gives you freedom of action, because you're basically robbing from and murdering people, but you have to appear behind a appearance of legitimacy to do that. So you got to always keep people confused about what you're really doing. And that's what's going on now. You know, they're not going to blow the world apart in a war. They're going to converge. This is good business. This is good politics, just to work out the difference. And the Vatican's at the center of doing that. They're the power that financially and in other ways can bring them all together, and kind of in a nutshell. Yeah.
Angela wants to know, are there any reasons you're aware of that the cardinals didn't choose an Italian pope?
Well, don't forget, like the Ninth Circle is really being a lot of the news. It's coming out more and more, not in the mainstream corporate press, but all over people are aware of it. So you got to kind of de-emphasize that now. It's tied in with the old Italian mob. They're tied in with what's called 'Ndrangheta, which is the Italian mafia, or the European mafia that provides a lot of the children and the teenagers in that for these rituals. So it makes sense to shift over to the New World and get an American in, somebody who was in South America. But unfortunately, by doing that, you're then exposing that whole Pacific Rim corruption and that we've been talking about. So it's just a shift to kind of get people. People, don't forget, people have a 3-minute memory, right?
Mm-hmm. Is it possible they may have slowly poisoned the last pope to replace him?
I don't think they'd have to. I mean, he was pretty much playing along. He was instrumental with Pietro Parolin in getting the Chinese underwriting the Chinese for their Western Hemisphere expansion. And so, yeah, and they've already done that once. You know, they don't need to. He was a loyal player from the beginning, ever since he was doing the deal with the junta in Argentina in the 80s.
Tammy wants to know, have you ever come across any information on the Black Pope?
Yeah, the Jesuits, you know, people remember how we forced Ratzinger out of office, but they forget that we in fact forced the Jesuit head out of office, Adolphe Pichon, a year later, in April 2014, because we found that the Jesuits were at the center of so much of this historically, and they were kind of spearheading the move towards China, kind of shifting support. And I think that's one of the reasons he stepped down. But, you know, they're like Pietro Parolin, they're financially as well, kind of the string puller, the kingmaker in the background, right?
So this question presupposes that the Vatican has financial problems. According to Kevin, the Vatican is sucking the financial wealth from all of the countries of the world into its own self. Papa saying, can the Vatican's financial problems be fixed by having a savvy pope, or are they too deeply rooted?
Well, yeah, you're right, Shaun. But here's the other thing too. Every time the Vatican talks about Vatican financial problems and financial reform, Bergoglio did that, and it was to cover up the fact that he was involved. For example, when he was in Argentina, he used the Vatican Bank to buy Exocet missiles for the Argentine junta in the Falklands War. And as a matter of fact, I know this from people in the British government, Maggie Thatcher was so angry at him for having done that she put out a hit on him. The MI6 was looking for a way to kill Archbishop Bergoglio, who would never become Pope Francis. But, you know, so anyway, that's so the whole talk of financial reform is propaganda to find a way to cover up corruption or even solidify their stuff even more, you know, in the banks. So.
Pam wants to know, has the Vatican Bank ever been robbed? That wouldn't end up very well for the robbers, I imagine. When you look at all of the stuff we've done with Kevin about, they've got their own intelligence agencies, they've got their own assassins, they've got their own military, their own police, their own laws.
Well, Roberto Calvi, we mentioned, the banker who was found hanging under, that's in the movie Godfather Part 2. They show him hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. But he was someone who was trying to steal. Steal, they're the biggest thieves in history, but to steal from them. And another thing to look at, though, which brings in the present Pope as well, he's from Chicago, and the Chicago Catholic Church are deeply involved with the Chicago mob. Cardinal Cody, C-O-D-Y, Paul Marcinkus. It's in this book, In God's Name, by David Yallop. It's about the assassination of Pope John Paul I. You should look it up. Y-A-L-L-O-P, David Yallop. And it goes into great detail of the connection between the Chicago Mafia and the Vatican, and how numerous popes, including Ratzinger, had advisors, cardinals who were openly mafia members, like Cardinal Bevaluca in New Jersey, who just before the first trial of a whole bunch of priests in Philadelphia for raping, violating children, he died suddenly. Cardinal Bevaluca dies in bed the day before he was to appear in court. And again, it's tied in with that mob connection between Chicago, i.e. present Pope, i.e. Vatican Bank. So there you go.
Let me just give a definition before I ask you this question. So Operation Gladio was the code name for clandestine stay-behind operations organized by Western Union, NATO, and the CIA. in collaboration with European intelligence agencies during the Cold War. Specifically, Gladio refers to the Italian branch of these networks. And the question from Ray is, are we seeing the modern version of Operation Gladio in plain sight?
I think it's ongoing, and it isn't connected to just one papal figurehead. An example of that too, and I think another reason they killed the guy in 1978, John Paul I, was he had found out about this thing called the P2